So the next speaker we're going to have up is named Mark Buffett, and he's lived in Monona for 19 years. And Mark is a retired school teacher and is now a golf coach, and who has dabbled on radio, TV, and theater over the years. He's currently serving as carrying coordinator at Monona United Methodist Church. He's a member of Monona's Sustainability Committee and a volunteer at WVMO, the voice of Monona. Can we give it up for Mark Buffett, everybody?
Thank you. Thank you. Hey, what a good-looking crowd we got here tonight. So, when my sons were small boys, their mother and I made a concerted effort to keep toy guns out of the house. As the boys got a little older, an interesting phenomenon occurred. Sticks and branches found out in the backyard and in the parks all of a sudden became weapons for their play, imaginary battles with enemies and bad guys. And next thing we know, toys that resembled firearms appeared in the house. Legos turned into machine guns and laser guns for their play. At the breakfast table one morning, after a few bites out of a piece of toast, it was gripped and raised. "Look, Mom, a pistol." So this caused me pause, and I pondered my boyhood years. And I remembered every summer going down to southern Illinois to a small town called Cobden where my grandparents lived. And I relished those warm summer mornings when I was out learning to fish, to bait a hook and catch fish in my grandpa's pond. And then my grandpa also taught me how to ride a riding lawnmower and operate the blades, and I would go out mowing the lawns and the point out past their house and clearings. He also taught me how to handle and shoot a .22 rifle. And I loved going down into the valley, down below their house, and shooting tin cans off the big flat rock at the edge of the valley. Back home in Iowa, I remember being in hunter safety classes or gun safety classes with other youth and using BB gun rifles for target practice, and I really enjoyed that. And then around 10 years old, we moved from Ames, Iowa to Stevens Point, Wisconsin. And a subtle change happened, one that I really didn't comprehend at the time. But the rest of my youth and teen summer activities were spent fishing with my brother and my father. Many fond memories, fishing stories that you wouldn't believe. Actually, there is one fishing story. And, well, that's probably for another time. Anyhow, you can imagine, I caught a northern pike without ever putting a hook in it. You can imagine me as a teenager, diving into McDill Pond and coming up with a pike in my teeth and my hands. But that's not how it happened. Anyhow, the adventures of fishing with my dad and brother are so deep in me. But at that time, the adventures around guns stopped. I didn't really question it. When I was in my early 20s, around the age of my sons, I was reflecting, and I had a conversation with my dad, and I asked my dad about that time in our family's life, and I said, "Well, what happened to your guns?" And he told me. It was 1969. We moved from Ames, Iowa to Stevens Point, and rather than unpacking the guns, he went down to the local sporting goods store and traded them in for fishing equipment. New reels and rods and lures came, and he had made a decision that he no longer wanted guns in our house. He reminded me that the 60s was a decade of assassinations. He told me about Medgar Evers, and then President John F. Kennedy, and then Malcolm X. And then 1968 happened, and Martin Luther King was assassinated. And 2 months later, Bobby Kennedy. Dad had enough with the guns. He wanted them out of the house. So they were gone. He never really talked to us about it, but you're a kid and you just kind of go with the flow, and we're having a lot of fun fishing and cruising around in this little 16-foot boat that he made. But the ambivalence I have with guns remains, and it's heightened these days in our culture and in our discussions and our debates. As a special ed teacher just up the hill at La Follette High School, over the course of those 20 years, on several occasions I was saddened to learn current and former students of mine who had died. I had a student that overdosed on heroin. There was a couple of students that were mixing alcohol and drugs and speeding cars, often a deadly combination. And there were two young men that stood out that were lots of potential and were shot and killed with a handgun. My ambivalence with guns is thick, it's unresolved, so I continue to seek understanding, and in doing so I ran across a video blog, and it gave me pause when I listened to the first few lines that this guy was talking about. This blogger contends that there are three types of people in the gun debate. There are three camps. You're pro-gun, you're anti-gun, or you understand how guns work and what their purpose is. That caused me to pause again. I went on and watched, he did a 3-part series on gun control and guns, and it's quite good. But my ambivalence remains, my seeking continues. The day after Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, Bobby Kennedy gave a memorable speech. 2 months later to the day, he was then gunned down. I leave you with a few short excerpts from his talk. His words from over 51 years ago are still stinging and poignant today. It is not the concern of any one race. The victims of violence are black and white, rich and poor, young and old, famous and unknown. They are, most important of all, human beings whom other human beings loved and needed. No one can be certain whom next will suffer from some senseless act of bloodshed, and yet it goes on and on and on in this country of ours. We seemingly tolerate a rising level of violence that ignores our common humanity. We make it easy for men of all shades of sanity to acquire weapons and ammunition that they desire. Too often we honor swagger and bluster and wielders of force. Some Americans who accuse others of rioting and inciting riots have by their own conduct invited them. Some look for scapegoats, others look for conspiracies. But this much is clear: violence breeds violence. Repression breeds retaliation. And only a cleansing of our whole society can remove the sickness from our souls. We learn, at the last, to look at our brothers and sisters as alien people with whom we share a city, but not a community. People who are bound to us in common dwelling, but not in common effort. We learn to share only a common fear, only a common desire to retreat from one another, only a common impulse to meet disagreement with force.